true haunting horror stories. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts. Never. Growing up, I'd hear all the stories. People talking about haunted houses, strange noises at night, and things that just couldn't be explained. But I always shrugged it off. To me, they were just that. Stories. Nothing more. That all changed one summer. I needed to get away, you know. Life was too loud, too fast. So I rented a small cabin up in the Adirondacks. A place far from anything, no Wi-Fi, no cell service, just trees, air, and the promise of quiet. The cabin itself was old, but charming in a way. Wooden floors that creaked with every step, a stone fireplace that cracked and popped as it kept the place warm. It felt peaceful. The first few days were perfect. I hiked, read, spent hours just listening to the wind rustling through the trees. The sort of peace you can only find when you're a million miles away from everything. But that peace? It didn't last. It started on the fourth night. I was sitting out on the porch, watching the sun set, the woods bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Everything felt normal. But then, I saw something. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. You know how it is, just shadows shifting in the dying light. But no. I blinked and looked again. There was someone standing at the edge of the woods. A figure, tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing. It didn't move, not even a twitch. It just stood there, at the edge of the trees, like it was waiting for something. Or maybe for me. I couldn't breathe. My heart, thump thump, it started to race. Maybe it was a hiker, I thought. Just someone out for a walk. But something felt wrong. The way it stood there so still. It didn't belong there. And that's when I realized it was far too close. Too close. I shook my head, tried to dismiss it. It had to be a trick of the light, right? Maybe it was a deer, just standing perfectly still. I almost convinced myself. But deep down, I knew. I knew something wasn't right. I didn't sleep that night. I locked all the windows, pulled the blinds down, and tried to settle in. But every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window, my mind kept going back to that figure. It was out there, watching. I kept telling myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. But my body wouldn't listen. The next morning, the woods were calm, peaceful, like nothing had happened. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered. And when I stepped outside for a walk, it followed me. I don't mean literally, but in my mind, it was there, that feeling of being watched. I could almost hear footsteps behind me, feel eyes on my back. I tried to focus on the trail, on the birds, the breeze, but it was impossible. I couldn't stop thinking about that figure. That's when I heard it. A whisper. It came from nowhere, so quiet at first, so soft I thought I imagined it. But then, again, a low, guttural sound, like a voice, only it didn't speak in words. It was a hum, something I could feel more than hear. It crawled under my skin. My pulse quickened. The whisper came again, a little louder, but I couldn't make it out. It felt like it was coming from all around me, like the trees themselves were speaking to me in some language I didn't understand. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no one. Nothing. Just the woods. I turned around and walked back toward the cabin. Fast. Too fast. I didn't even care that my legs were burning or that my breath was sharp. I couldn't get back there fast enough. When I reached the cabin, it looked like nothing had changed. The wind was calm. The air still. But I couldn't shake the feeling. That presence. It was still there, hovering, just beyond the trees. That night, I didn't go outside. I didn't even open the windows. I stayed inside, curled up on the couch with the lights on, trying to shake off the panic. But it didn't work. I kept hearing things, footsteps, soft, light, like someone walking around the cabin. But every time I looked outside, nothing was there. I just couldn't stop feeling it, that sense of being watched. Then around midnight, the knocking started. At first it was soft, just a tap barely noticeable, but then, again, louder. 3 distinct knocks coming from the door. My heart skipped a beat. I froze. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe a branch against the door or some animal, but it wasn't. I crept over to the window, the flashlight in my hand. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. I peeked through the blinds, my eyes scanning the dark, trying to make out anything at all. And then, I saw it. The figure. Standing there at the edge of the porch, just beyond the reach of the light. It was the same one from before, only this time, it was closer, much closer. I didn't move. My heart thudded in my chest, the blood rushing in my ears. It didn't make sense. I'd heard the knock, seen the figure, but it was too close. How had it gotten there? The wind howled outside, and for a long moment, I just stared. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even sway in the wind. It was like it was waiting for something. But waiting for what? I couldn't take it anymore. I backed away from the window, my legs shaking. I tried to calm myself, tried to make sense of it, but I couldn't. My mind was racing, and that figure, it wasn't leaving. It was still there. That night I didn't sleep a wink. I kept hearing things. Whispers that weren't there. Soft footsteps. More knocks. It felt like the cabin itself was alive, but no matter how hard I tried to shake the fear, I couldn't. The next morning, I packed my bags. I didn't even finish my coffee. I just left, and I haven't been back since. The figure? The whispers? They still haunt me. Every night when the wind picks up, I hear them again. Soft murmurs like they're calling to me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, I feel it. The eyes. Watching. Waiting. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I'll never forget the feeling, the terror that washed over me. Some places aren't meant to be visited. Some woods should stay unexplored. I learned that the hard way. This is the True Haunting horror story number 2. Some places just won't let go of you. No matter how far you run, no matter how hard you try to forget, they find a way to creep back into your thoughts. They settle into the corners of your mind like an old scar you can't stop picking at. Every time you think you've moved on, you realize it's still there, waiting. I try not to think about it anymore. I really do. But it keeps coming back. And now, as I sit here, trying to put the pieces together, I know I have to tell this story. Maybe it will finally make sense. Or maybe it will just make me remember things I wish I could forget. It started as just another weekend road trip, something to shake up the routine. Me and my best friend Tom, we'd been friends for years. We were both in our mid-20s, restless, craving something different. And that's when Tom brought it up. He'd heard about a place, a little-known village on the outskirts of town. It was called The Hollow. At first, I thought it was just another one of his half-baked ideas. But Tom didn't always throw these things out without reason. He had a way of picking up on stories, rumors, things that felt off. This place, he said, had been abandoned for years. No one knew what had happened to the people who lived there, but all the locals had a story. Some said the place was cursed. Others said it had been forgotten by time. Either way, no one went near it. But that's exactly why we should go, right? Tom's voice had this excitement to it, and I couldn't help but be drawn in. We'll just drive out there, take a look around, and come back, he said. No harm, no foul. I wasn't so sure about the no harm part, but something about it felt thrilling. So we packed up, hit the road, and set off. It didn't take long to get there. The drive was quiet, peaceful even. The kind of road where you can let your thoughts wander, the countryside unfolding around you. The trees grew thicker as we got closer, and as the miles passed, it felt like the world was getting heavier. The hollow wasn't marked by any signs, no landmarks to guide us. It was like we were driving into a forgotten corner of the world. When we finally reached the outskirts, I thought the place was Dead. Silent. Empty. But then the car slowed, and I could see it. It was like stepping into a ghost story. The village stood there, half collapsed, its buildings barely holding themselves up. Roofs sagged, windows were boarded up, and the air itself seemed stale. We stopped the car at the edge of town. I felt a strange sensation creeping over me, an unease I couldn't quite shake. It was like the air was thicker here, the shadows deeper. But I shrugged it off. I'd come this far, right? Tom, ever the enthusiast, was already out of the car snapping pictures. "Come on, let's take a look around," he said, his voice too eager. "You never know what we might find." I followed him, but the weight of the place, this heaviness in the air like something was watching, kept gnawing at me. Still, we walked deeper into the town, the gravel crunching under our feet. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the sound of our footsteps. It was as if the village had died long ago, and nothing had disturbed it since. We reached the village square. The fountain there, once beautiful, was cracked and dry, the stone worn and covered in moss. Weeds pushed through the ground, creeping up around the ruins of what had been a life. But there was something about it, something that made me feel like we were intruders. It wasn't just abandoned, it was forgotten. I don't know how much time passed, but it felt like we'd been there for hours. And then, just as we were about to turn around, I heard it. A footstep. Slow. Deliberate. It was faint at first, like a whisper, but it came closer. Closer. Tom and I stopped. Our eyes met. And for a moment I thought we were both thinking the same thing. We're not alone. I turned toward the sound. There, standing in the shadow of one of the buildings, was a figure. A man. At first I thought it was just someone else, another traveler, maybe someone who had come to see the place for themselves. But as the figure stepped into the dim light, I realized I was wrong. This wasn't just any man. He was tall. Too tall, his frame thin, almost skeletal. His clothes, dark, tattered, hanging off his body as though they no longer fit. His face was pale, too pale, with deep, hollow eyes. Those eyes black, empty, like holes leading into nothing. I froze. What was he doing here? My heart thudded in my chest. Tom's voice was barely a whisper. Who is that?" I don't know," I said, my words sticking in my throat. I wanted to run. I wanted to grab Tom and just leave. But something kept me rooted to the spot, like the figure was pulling at me, keeping me there. He didn't move, not at first. He just stood there, watching us with those empty eyes. I knew something was wrong. Wrong. Tom, the braver of us two, was the first to break the silence. "We need to go," he said. "Now." I didn't argue. I couldn't. We turned, almost in unison, and started walking back to the car, but I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. The man hadn't moved. He was still standing there, his black eyes locked on us. I was sure of it. And then, just as we reached the edge of the village, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. As though someone was following us. But when I looked back, the man wasn't moving. Was it him? We ran. I don't even remember how we got to the car. I just remember my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. Tom jumped in beside me, his breath ragged, his eyes wild. "Go, go, go!" he shouted. And I did. We sped off without looking back, the wheels screeching against the gravel, the engine roaring to life. The rest of the night passed in silence. Neither of us spoke, not until we were far, far away from the hollow. But I couldn't shake the feeling that man was still there. Watching. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like the hollow had followed us. It wasn't just the fear or the dread that had settled in my chest. It was something deeper. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black, hollow eyes staring at me. And every time I looked into the shadows, no matter where I was, I thought I saw him, standing there, waiting. Tom never mentioned it again, neither did I. But I knew. I knew that neither of us had truly left that place. Somewhere in the darkness, the hollow is still waiting, and I don't think we'll ever be free of it. This is The True Haunting, horror story number 3. Some places should never be explored, forgotten, left alone. You hear stories about them, whispers passed around like the wind through old trees, but none of them prepare you for what's waiting. No amount of research can make you ready. This was the lesson I learned, the hard way, at Old Riverton Hall. My name is Jack Carter, and at the time, I was a seasoned urban explorer. The kind of person who wasn't afraid of a little dust or a few broken boards. I had explored places that were miles deep in the woods, structures forgotten by time, overgrown by nature. But Riverton Hall? That place was different. I should have known better. I should have listened to the warnings. It all started with a post I found online. You know, one of those urban exploration forums, filled with stories and half-rumors. Someone had posted about Riverton Hall, calling it the most haunted place they'd ever explored. A mansion built in the 1800s by Jonathan Riverton, a wealthy industrialist who disappeared after a fire ravaged his estate in the 1950s. Nobody knows what happened to him or his family, but the house remained in ruins, decaying but still standing. The kind of place that whispers your name if you're foolish enough to listen. They said strange things happened there. Objects moved. People saw figures standing at the windows when no one was inside. Some said they'd heard whispering in the dark. I was intrigued. There was something magnetic about the idea of a house with so many stories tangled into its walls. But I'll admit I didn't think much of it. I thought I'd find an empty, forgotten home with a few cobwebs and broken glass. I was wrong. I didn't hesitate for long. The day was crisp, autumn in the air. I packed my gear, my camera, a notebook, and a flashlight, ready for whatever lay ahead. The drive out was uneventful, the road darkening as I got further away from the town. And then, there it was. The gate, rusted and twisted, barely standing against the creeping ivy that wrapped around it. My pulse quickened as I stepped out of the car. I told myself to ignore the unease that crept into my bones. The air was still, too still, but curiosity kept me moving. I slipped through the broken gate and approached the front door, which hung half open, like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. The floorboards groaned under my feet as I stepped inside, the smell of mildew thick in the air. The walls, once grand, were now bare and peeling. Everything was covered in dust, forgotten by the world. The silence was suffocating. But then, I heard it. A faint creak. I paused, my breath hitching in my throat. It wasn't the house settling, I was sure of it. It was the sound of someone, something, moving. My heart rate quickened, and I tightened my grip on the flashlight. I told myself it was just an animal, a stray cat or a rat, nothing more. But I was lying to myself. I wandered deeper into the mansion, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The halls stretched before me, the darkness swallowing the light of my flashlight with each step. I kept moving, further and further into the heart of the house, but every room felt colder. The walls seemed to close in, pushing me into the corners of my mind. I wanted to leave, but something deep in my gut, told me that I couldn't. I made my way upstairs. The staircase was cracked, the wood splintering under my weight, but I kept going. My legs felt heavier with each step. As I reached the top, I noticed a strange stillness in the air, thicker than before. I turned the corner of the hallway, and that's when I saw her. She was at the end of the hall, standing perfectly still. A figure in a long white dress, her back to me. She didn't move, didn't even breathe. She was just there. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare blink. And then, without warning, she turned. Her face was blurred. Like the fog hadn't quite left, like her features couldn't be fully formed. I could feel her eyes, though. She wasn't looking at me, but I could feel her gaze on me. Cold, empty. I backed up slowly, but she didn't stay where she was. She moved. Her movements were unnatural, floating, gliding like she wasn't touching the ground at all. My body froze. My feet were rooted to the spot. She took one step, and then another. Closer, each movement closer. I wanted to scream, but the sound was stuck in my throat. I turned and ran. My feet hit the ground hard, each step a desperate plea for escape. The house echoed with my frantic footfalls, but the figure didn't stop. The footsteps behind me weren't mine. They were hers, growing louder, closer. I ran down the stairs, my breath ragged. The flashlight wavered in my hand, casting shadows that seemed to twist and move on their own. The door was ahead, just ahead. My heart pounded, and every instinct told me to keep running, to reach the door. But it felt like it was just too far away, too distant. The hallway I had been in just moments ago was different now. It was no longer the same. The furniture I had passed earlier was gone. The walls that once had wallpaper were now bare, like a ghost had ripped the history from the room. The coldness was unbearable, like the house itself was closing in on me. I glanced over my shoulder, my pulse racing, and there she was again, standing at the far end of the hall. She wasn't walking anymore. She was just standing, her head tilted slightly as if observing me. My legs gave out beneath me. I collapsed to the floor, my back pressed against the wall. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I forced myself to stand, my body trembling. The door was right there. I reached for the handle, my hand shaking so violently I almost couldn't grasp it. When I finally got it, I pulled. It didn't budge. I yanked again. Nothing. The door was stuck. That's when the whispering began. It was soft at first, like a breath of wind across the back of my neck, but it grew louder, closer. "Help me," the voice said. I spun around, but no one was there. "Let me out," the voice whispered again. I could feel it now. The air was thick with something heavy, something dark. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the house was alive, feeding on my fear. And then, the figures appeared. They weren't solid. They weren't fully there. They were shadows, flickering in the corners of my eyes. But when I turned to look directly at them, they were gone. But I knew they were still there. They were watching. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. I knew I couldn't leave. Not now. Not after seeing this. And then, behind me, I heard the soft click of footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps. She was there, behind me, close. I closed my eyes, tears spilling down my face, and I wished for nothing more than to wake up from this nightmare. But I never did. When they found me, my camera was gone, my notebook was gone. But they said they found the mansion still standing, empty, as it always had been. The door was locked from the inside, and there was a strange feeling in the air, like something was missing. I never got out, and maybe, just maybe, the ones who go in never really leave.